Theodore and Pugwash the mini-sub were going for a cruise together before dock time one night. "Theodore, do you think we'll ever get to go out on the ocean?" said Pugwash. "Maybe. One day," said Theodore, "when I'm an ocean tug. And I'm a great undersea explorer," added Pugwash. "We'll have fantastic adventures together." They were just passing Lily the lighthouse on their way back when Pugwash dived deep. Then she popped up again in another part of the harbor. "Why did you do that?" Theodore called, moving over to Pugwash. "Oh, I don't like lighthouses," explained Pugwash, kind of sheepishly. "Why not?" Theodore wanted to know. "First, they shine their light," explained Pugwash. "And then they blow their foghorn. It's a very scary sound." "I thought undersea explorers aren't afraid of anything," smiled Theodore. "Oh, I know that," said Pugwash. But she couldn't stop a little shiver running down her hull when she heard that foghorn again. The following morning, Stewiacke took Pugwash to the shoreline outside the big harbor. Pugwash was going to take underwater pictures. "Remember that Ekum-Seekum Circle isn't far from here," said Stewiacke. "Stay close." "I know," said Pugwash. You see, some said Ekum-Seekum Circle was a place where ships sometimes got lost forever. "Diving," announced Pugwash. Time passed quickly that day. Pugwash cruised along, taking pictures of the underwater rocks along the coast. Soon, it was time for her to come up again. But Pugwash was in for an awful surprise. She broke through the surface and saw Lunenburg Lighthouse. Lunenburg was shining her light, but Pugwash just knew what was coming next. "Foghorn!" she shuddered and dived again. As deep as she could go. Back in the big harbor, Theodore returned from work to find a dispatcher talking to Emily in an urgent voice. "Stewiacke has reported that Pugwash is missing," he said. "I would like you to help find her." "I want to go too," Theodore said right away. "This is a job for an ocean tug," the dispatcher told him. "You just don't know the area outside the harbor well enough, Theodore." "But I know Pugwash," said Theodore in a firm voice. "He does spend more time with her than anyone else," said Emily. The dispatcher was thoughtful for a moment. "Very well, Theodore," he said. "But remember, Constance will be in charge out there." Meanwhile, Pugwash had found the entrance to an underwater cave. "I'll be safe from that lighthouse in here," she told herself. Pugwash slowly entered the cave. Then she thought she heard voices. She turned and got a fright. 3 rocks were staring at her. "Who? What are you?" she stammered. Lo and behold, the rocks began to speak. "Harum scarum, shockum freakum. We're the rhyming rocks of Ekum-Seekum." Added the 3rd rock. And that's when Pugwash knew she had dived straight into the terrible Ekum-Seekum Circle, where ships sometimes got lost forever. Pugwash began to back out of the cave, and the rocks began to talk again. Fold 'em, sub or mouse. She'll come back fast when she beholds that lighthouse. And that scary foghorn, added the 3rd rock. How do they know I'm scared of that sound? Pugwash thought to herself. Then, maybe the rocks were right. How could she go back up there? Pugwash decided to try to find another way out of the cave. She floated on through the cavern. And found another opening. But as soon as she was poking her nose out, a great light from above made her gasp out loud. Right away, she was sure what the light was. A monster lighthouse waiting for her up there. And if it was a monster lighthouse, she knew what was coming next. The biggest, loudest, scariest foghorn in the whole wide, wet ocean. At that very moment, Theodore and Emily were arriving at Shipwreck Rock. They could see Constance, the Coast Guard ship, and Stewiacke by the light of the big, bright, full moon beaming down on the water. Theodore, called Constance, stay close to the shore and out of the way. Emily, you come with me. I know I can help find Pugwash, Theodore said softly. But no one else believes I can. Theodore was floating towards the shore when Lunenburg's light hit his face. Lighthouse, he said to himself. Foghorn, he added. Suddenly, Theodore had an idea where Pugwash was, but Constance had told him to stay close to the shore. Oh, what should I do? He tried to decide. Constance was leading the search team, shining her powerful searchlight at the water. There's only a cave down there, said Northumberland, rising to the surface. The submarine was helping look for Pugwash, too. It was too small for me to go inside, added Northumberland, but I didn't see Pugwash anywhere. Turn off that light, a voice called out. It was Theodore. You're scaring Pugwash, he added. Theodore, what are you talking about? Said Constance. Pugwash is afraid of lighthouses, Theodore said quickly, especially foghorns. Theodore, we don't know what you're talking about, said Emily. She always dives when she sees a lighthouse, Theodore replied. She won't come up because she thinks Constance's searchlight shining down on her is a lighthouse too. Are you sure about this? Said Constance. She always does, repeated Theodore. Very well, said Constance, turning on her searchlight. We'll try this. Everyone held their breath. And then? Nothing. No sign of Pugwash. We'll keep looking my way, said Constance, turning her searchlight on again. We must have missed something the first time. Theodore, it's time you went home. The others began to head off again. I was sure I was right, Theodore said to himself. At least the moon is shining, said Northumberland, beginning to dive again. It's as bright as a lighthouse down there. Lighthouse, repeated Theodore. Wait, he shouted out loud. What is it now, Theodore? Said Constance. Pugwash is down there. She won't come up because she's afraid of the light from the moon. I thought you said she was afraid of the lighthouse, said Constance, beginning to lose her temper. Or was it my searchlight? Well, which is it, Theodore? From under the water, continued Theodore, she might think the moon is a giant lighthouse shining down on her. What are we going to do? Said Stewiacke. Make the moon go away? Theodore saw that Owen, the giant oil rig, was nearby. That's exactly what we're going to do, he said. We have to move Owen here, now. Theodore, snapped Constance, I've heard just about enough of your wild ideas for one night. We know how to search for someone out here. My friend is down there, said Theodore, with a voice as hard as the steel he was built from. And I'm going to find her. I'll help you, Emily said quietly. I hope you're right about this, Constance said slowly. I hope I'm right, too, Theodore thought to himself. Deep down below, Pugwash was still staring at the beam of light. She was sure that with a light that big, there must be a horrible foghorn sound with it. The fear almost froze her where she floated. Far above, Theodore and Emily were using every bit of strength they had to move Owen over Ecum Circle. Here I come to make the moon disappear, hollered Owen in his extra loud voice. Down below, Pugwash saw that the light was going out. Lighthouses don't stop shining their lights, she said to herself. She began to wonder if that bright light really had been a lighthouse. At last, the big oil rig was in position. The tugs had got him between the moon and the water like a giant umbrella. "Turn off your lights," Theodore called. Everyone did what he asked. "No sign of her," said Northumberland. Theodore heard Lunenburg's foghorn in the distance, and he had another idea. Before he could think about what to do, Theodore blew his loudest whistle. In the dark depths, Pugwash heard something. Something familiar. Could it be Theodore's whistle? Or was it those rocks playing tricks on her? Theodore would be trying to find me, she decided. It must be him. And it really is time to be an undersea explorer. "This isn't working," said Constance. "Wait, just a little longer, please," called Theodore. "Look!" cried Northumberland. It was Pugwash. Pugwash was safe. Everyone blew their loudest whistles. "Hooray! Hooray for Pugwash! Hooray for Theodore!" Pugwash and Theodore floated very close to each other. "I knew you'd know how to find me, Theodore," Pugwash said softly. "You're going to make a great ocean tug. And I knew you'd be okay, Pugwash," smiled Theodore. "You're already a great undersea explorer." Early one morning, all the tugboats were asleep. All the tugboats, that is, but one. Hank was up. It was time for his special job for the week. Each morning, as soon as the sun woke up, Hank collected old bumpers from around the harbor and took them to Shediac, the shipyard shed. "Morning, Hank," called Shediac as soon as he saw the tug. Shediac looked forward to seeing Hank just as much as Hank looked forward to seeing him. "Good morning," smiled Hank. "Plenty of old bumpers today." "I've plenty of new ones for you," said Shediac. You see, Hank brought Shediac all the old worn-out bumpers from the tugs in the docks, and Shediac gave Hank the new ones in their place. It wasn't the biggest job in the big harbor, but to Hank, it was very important. "We better get started," said Hank, moving into position to unload his bumpers. "Aye, aye, Hank," said Shediac. Hank smiled. It was funny, but he always felt just a little bit bigger whenever he supplied the ship shed. Hank was coming home from work later that day. Theodore looked like he was leaving the harbor. "Where are you going, Theodore?" called Hank. "Oh, I'm going to see Owen," replied Theodore. He explained that his job that week was checking the anchor cable of Owen, the giant oil rig. Owen was working outside the harbor. "Boy, that must be fun," said Hank. Theodore knew that Hank had never been out on the ocean before. He had an idea. "Well, maybe you could come with me," he said. "Do you really think I could?" said Hank. "Well, we could ask the dispatcher," smiled Theodore. "Do you think we could ask him right now?" Well, the dispatcher listened carefully to Theodore's idea. Then he turned to Hank. "I think it would be fine, Hank," he began. "Theodore has a job to do, so try not to get in the way." "Oh, no, sir," said Hank. "Oh, I'll stay out of the way and it will be fine." Hank tried to look as serious as possible as he set off from the dock. "Oh, and Hank?" called the dispatcher. "Yes, sir," said Hank. "Have fun," said the dispatcher with a big smile on his voice. "Yes, sir," tooted Hank. The lights of the big harbor were just coming on as Hank set off with Theodore to visit Owen. It was his first time out on the ocean, and he was already having fun. Soon, the two tugs were floating into the wide, open ocean waters. "It's dark out here," Hank said softly. "Look up there, Hank," said Theodore. Hank looked up into the sky. "Ooh," he breathed. "It's the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. far from the lights of the harbor, millions of stars shone down on the tugs with a magical glow. The tugboats turned off their engines and just drifted for a moment. "It's like we're the only boats in the whole world," said Hank. "It's so quiet," Theodore whispered. Just then, giant lights blazed on all around them.
"Just what I love about it, too,"
a big voice roared.
"So nice and peaceful."
Sure enough, it was Owen. Hank and Theodore grinned. It wasn't peaceful anywhere Owen was.
"Isn't this a Jim Dandy evening?" "Yes, sirree, Bob,"
Owen blared on. You see, Owen is a very noisy oil rig.
"Well, looky here,"
Owen hollered.
"if it isn't Hank."
"Hi, Owen," Hank called up.
"This calls for a special story,"
shouted Owen. The big rig began to tell the tugs all about the time a giant sea cabbage got sucked right up in his drill and gave him cauliflower ears. "Owen never told me this story before." Hank felt special being out on the ocean with Big Owen and Theodore. It was just like being an ocean tug.
"Everyone hush,"
Owen suddenly thundered.
"Northumberland's coming."
Sure enough, Northumberland's submarine was cruising by, about to begin his nightly underwater ocean patrol.
"Northumberland kinda likes it quiet,"
Owen bellowed in a voice so loud it rattled Hank's anchor.
"Northumberland,
Owen roared on.
we've a special guest tonight. Hank's here."
Hank looked around. Northumberland had disappeared. Then, just as suddenly, the sub popped up behind him, just as if Northumberland was playing a game. He dived again. Hank tried to guess where the sub would pop up next. "Over here, Hank," smiled Theodore.
"No, over here,"
shouted Owen. Splash! Northumberland bobbed up like a great big bar of soap in the water. Hank laughed out loud. "Hank?" a voice called out from the dark. "What are you doing out here?" It was Constance, the Coast Guard ship. The dispatcher said I could come," said Hank, a little nervous.
"He's fine,"
bellowed Owen.
"Little loud, though."
"Everyone please turn off your lights," continued Constance. "Hank, you come with me."
Hank followed along behind Constance. His engine was beating so loudly, he was sure they could hear him all the way back to the big harbor. Oh, he hoped he hadn't done something wrong. Constance turned on her powerful Coast Guard searchlight.
It was aimed up at the sky. "Do you see those stars there that look like a big soup spoon?"
"Uh-huh," replied Hank.
"They call those the Big Dipper," Constance continued. "If you ever get lost out here, just follow the spoon home."
"Wow," said Hank, still staring at the sky.
"Time to get to work,"
boomed Owen. "You better move back, Hank," called Theodore. Hank moved away, and Theodore began checking and moving Owen's enormous anchor cables. Well, Hank's smile felt like it was frozen on his face all the way home. "Can we visit Owen again tomorrow night, Theodore?" he said.
"Maybe."
Theodore smiled sleepily. Hank couldn't wait. Bright and early the next morning, all the tugs were ready to begin the new day. All the tugs, that is, except one. Hank was so excited about visiting Owen again, he hadn't slept all night. Hank slept in. And by the time he finally woke up, it was too late to collect old bumpers for Shediac.
I'll bring you those bumpers tomorrow,"
He called.
or maybe the day after." "I'll be here, Hank."
Shediac called back.
He missed Hank's visit, and to tell you the truth, Hank missed visiting Shediac. But right now, all Hank could really think about was visiting Owen again. He couldn't wait for it to be dark. That evening, Hank got permission to visit Owen with Theodore again, and the two tugs set off out of the harbor. "Do you think Northumberland will be there?" said Hank. "Probably," smiled Theodore. "And maybe Constance can show me that big flipper again," Hank went on, already looking forward to all the fun he was going to have with everybody. "Owen, Owen," Hank called. "I'm back again."
Good for you, Hank.
Hollered Owen. "What story are you going to tell?" said Hank. He settled in for a real rip-roarer.
Oh, no stories tonight.
Replied Owen.
Heaps of work to do.
Theodore moved into position to begin moving one of Owen's giant anchor cables. "Try and stay out of the way, Hank," he called. Hank backed up right away. "Careful, Hank." It was Northumberland. Hank had almost backed into the sub. "You surprised me," smiled Hank, thinking Northumberland was playing his diving game with him again. Sure enough, the submarine disappeared under the water. "Where are you, Northumberland?" giggled Hank. "Northumberland," said Hank after a moment. "Northumberland." "He must have gone," said Hank, puzzled. "Constance," he cried, "I was waiting for you." Hank was very happy to see the Coast Guard. "Everyone turn off your lights," he shouted, "so we can see the sky." "Sorry, not now, Hank," said Constance as she cruised past. "I'm very busy tonight."
Stay back there, little fella.
Owen called down to Hank.
These big cables can be dangerous.
Hank watched everyone, busy at work. Suddenly, he did feel like a little fella. A little fella who didn't really belong out there. Hank was quiet as he floated back home to the big harbor with Theodore. "Theodore?" he said at last. "Yes, Hank," said Theodore. "The first time we went to visit Owen, that was really special, wasn't it?" "Oh, sure was," smiled Theodore. "But tonight," Hank went on, "no one really had time to do special things with me." Theodore was thoughtful for a moment. "I guess we all had other things we had to do." "And I really didn't," said Hank sadly. "I was just visiting, and everyone else had jobs to do." Hank caught sight of Shediac, the shipyard shed. Suddenly, Hank smiled. There was one job he had to do, an important job. "Theodore," he said. "Yes, Hank?" "Would you mind if tomorrow I didn't go with you to visit Owen? I have some other things I really need to do." "I think that would be fine, Hank," smiled Theodore. Early the next morning, all the tugboats were asleep. All the tugboats, that is, but one. Hank was up. "Good morning, Shediac," Hank called to the shipyard shed.
Morning, Hank.
Shediac called back.
I was hoping you'd come today.
"I've been visiting Owen and staying up late," Hank explained.
Oh, that must be very special.
Said Shediac. "It is," said Hank, "once in a while, but visiting you is special all the time. Now let's get your bumpers unloaded."
Aye, aye, Hank.
Said Shediac. Hank smiled. It was funny, but he always felt just a little bit bigger whenever he supplied the shipyard shed.